Hello, this is Julian with Coffee Reviews, and today we'll be reviewing the Hunkute wash processed Ethiopia from Drop Coffee Roasters. There's the container right there. And Drop, based out of Stockholm, Sweden. And this is part 5 of our 24-part KaffeBox Advent Calendar series, and the 4th time Drop has appeared on this channel, having featured in our first ever KaffeBox Advent Calendar series back in 2020. And I really enjoyed both of the coffees that were featured in that calendar, as well as the one coffee we reviewed last year, which was a Bolivian coffee I enjoyed so much that it ended up in our top 10 coffees of 2021 list. So it's safe to say that I've had a pretty positive experience with this roaster up to this point. So when I found out that they were going to be featured in this calendar as well, I was looking forward to the opportunity of reviewing a couple more of their coffees. And again, the way that this works is the notes and tasting wheel are made with the V60. This cup right here is made with the Chemex, and Drop does have a brew guide on their website, which is a 15 grams in to 250 grams out, or a 16.67 to 1 water to coffee ratio. And they say 96 degrees Celsius or higher. And given that we've been brewing a lot of these coffees with 96, we just opted to stick with 96. So 96 degrees Celsius, 205 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, in terms of roast profile for this coffee, while all these coffees are by most standards considered lighter in general, given that they are Nordic coffees, I would say that this one had a slight bit more development than a couple of the other ones we've reviewed to this point. So I think definitely on the lighter side with a little bit more development than a couple of the other ones. With all of that out of the way, let's go ahead and start discussing this coffee. First impression, and this was consistent across both brew methods, as the cup came out somewhat delicate overall with a rounded out kind of moderately sweet florality to the cup. Also consistent in both of these coffees, and interestingly enough, I got significantly more floral sweetness through the Chemex, but that first impression wasn't necessarily what I was expecting. I should have, based off the fact that it is a wash-processed Ethiopian coffee. However, they didn't have any sort of floral notes listed on this one specifically. From this point, though, it did go into a fair bit of this strong, savory black tea-like aspect, complemented by this bright citric component to the cup. This cup is exceptionally well layered. I'll get into that here shortly. But in addition to that, it did have this defined stone fruit-like aspect. And in a couple of the coffees we've reviewed up to this point, I've said that the stone fruit has been a little bit more sugary as opposed to something that they had listed on there like a peach, which oftentimes I associate with a much more fresh fruit aspect. This one felt a lot more defined. The apricot that they had listed on here felt very apt, as it was a little bit more jammy, sugary, and definitely more in line with what I was getting from it. In addition to that, the finish of the cup had this really strong herbal quality to it as well. And this is what I was going to say about the layering of this coffee, was it initially starts out with this brightness followed by the sugary stone fruit, and then it did kind of finish into the robust, savory black tea-like herbality. And that was with the V60, as the Chemex is a little bit more interesting. And I think the first time I tried this coffee, I kind of got the impression that I was going to enjoy it a lot more through the Chemex, as it really seemed to kind of clean up a little bit of that herbality and that savory aspect, and helped define a lot more of the floral aspect to this coffee, as it reminds me a lot more of a sweet florality as well as a sugar cookie. And in addition to that, I felt that the fruit was even a little bit more defined in this brew method. All right, let's go ahead and put up the tasting wheel so you can see what we're getting. And a bunch of level 4s, so let's go through those real quick. The cleanliness level 4. Not surprising in any sense, it is a wash-processed Ethiopian coffee, although it is a little bit cleaner through the Chemex, but neither of which would justify lowering the ratings or increasing the ratings. Level 4 is pretty much perfect for this coffee. Finish, level 4. Yes, and when it was brewed through the V60, it had significantly more of that interesting herbal finish to the cup, that savory herbality finish in the cup. But what's so interesting about the Chemex is it has much more of a floral finish. So really different in that aspect. That's one of the main reasons I really enjoyed it a lot more through the Chemex. Sweetness, again, level 4, and it would actually be on the lower side of the level 4 through the V60, and right there at that level 4 mark through the Chemex. As again, it was a little sweeter in the Chemex as opposed to the V60, and sweeter in the floral sense as opposed to in the V60, which, I don't know, it was still kind of sweet in this slightly floral sense, but at the same time, maybe I'm thinking a little bit more of the fruit aspects being a little bit sweeter for that brew method. Acidity, level 4. That one was a really surprising one because this coffee does have the acidity and the brightness kind of at the forefront of the cup. As I mentioned, that layering, that's the order in which I'm experiencing these things. I think that kind of influenced the way that this tasting wheel turned out, because it kind of spiked the demonstration, the way that the tasting wheel is shown on this, the acidity is shown on this tasting wheel. So acidity possibly a little brighter than initially expected. Florality, level 4, and that's kind of the same with the florality. Since that was the first thing I tasted from this coffee through both brew methods, I think that impacted it scoring that level 4 mark, although it's actually quite justified in the Chemex. And while in theory, maybe I should lower it down to level 3 for the V60, since I start making this tasting wheel at the top when I'm making it, it scored that level 4 because early on it was quite prominent. Stone fruit, level 4. Yes, when you get that well-defined stone fruit aspect, especially through the V60, I felt it was a little bit, I would say, more prominent through the V60. Maybe less defined, but more prominent in general. That's why it reached all the way up there at that level 4 mark. A bunch of level 3s, so we'll start with the savoriness. Yeah, that's going to be the kind of black tea aspect to this coffee, and that also does play a slight role in the spice being so high at that level 3. This kind of herbal, savory aspect to the cup. Very much present, one of the more distinct and dominant factors, especially in the V60. Citrus fruit, level 3. I feel like that was the secondary most fruit characteristic in this cup of coffee. Wasn't necessarily expecting it, but it did have a lot of brightness right at the forefront of the cup. Berry fruit, level 3, and I feel like that might have been a little high. I might have primed myself into convincing that there was a little bit more grape than expecting. They do have a Chardonnay, I believe it's a white wine note on here. One thing that's always been interesting about Drop's coffees is they have a lot of wine notes listed on their coffees, but as the case was with the Bolivian coffee last year, I don't particularly taste a lot of wine in their coffees. In this case, I could taste a slight grapey quality. That was the same with the Bolivian coffee last year, was I could taste a slight grapey quality, but nothing that felt boozy in any sense. So I think it's justified at that level 3, although I wasn't getting much of the wine aspect. Not too different in the Chemex in that sense, but there are a lot of differences between these two brew methods that would be demonstrated in a completely different tasting wheel. But as far as the V60 goes, I think this is a pretty good representation of what I got for this coffee. All right, so my overall thoughts and impressions of this coffee, I actually really liked it through the Chemex. I think that this was really nice for an Ethiopian coffee, and given that what was at the forefront of this coffee was a sweet florality, that's a nice selling point to me. It had a lot of the things I look for: clarity, sweetness, florality, and while it didn't have as many of the fruit characteristics as I might have been hoping for, at least through the Chemex, it did have a fair bit of them through the V60, even if that was at the trade-off of more acidity and brightness than sweetness itself. So I guess it just kind of depends on which way we went with this coffee, but I feel like I could really work with this one and find a nice sweet spot that would bring out a lot of the fruit as well as floral characteristics and traits to this one. Type of person I would suggest this coffee to, I kind of hate to say it, but this is a little bit of a safe coffee. So if you're kind of looking for something that really seems to accentuate a lot of the black tea-like characteristics, given just how strong this one was in the finish, especially through the V60, then you can really enjoy that, because I know a lot of people really enjoy those herbal aspects and components to coffees, even if they aren't necessarily my favorite. But at the same time, you can get some great florality from this coffee as well. So it does kind of give you an option of picking which way you want to go with this coffee while maintaining great clarity, great sweetness, and definitely some hidden but potential wonderful fruit aspects to the cup as well. I think for the most part, I'll leave this review at that. If you've by chance had an opportunity to try this coffee, would love to know your thoughts and impressions of it as well. If you're enjoying the content, give this video a like, subscribe if you're not already subscribed. And this right here has been a review of the Hunkute wash processed Ethiopia from Drop Coffee Roasters. Thank you for watching.